What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today. I'm bringing you a Cocytus premium deck profile. Now, just a worth note, this is actually the deck that I was actually going to take to the Bushiroad Team League. That wasn't going to be in Chicago. It got canceled due to the whole COVID-19, regimen, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, so this one is going to be a little more detailed because I spent more time playtesting and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to cover that in more detail than usual. All right, let's get started. On to the grade threes. So for the grade threes, our main grade three, right, is going to be Cocytus. So there's a lot of things that he brings to the table compared to some of the other grade threes. For example, I did look into Night Rose. So one of the things is, first off, he has a protect gift marker. So that way when you ride, you actually get the gift marker. His skill is that during your turn, if your drop zone is 10 or more, he gets plus 10k, and then if it's 20 or more, he would get 20k instead, and a crit on top of that. So he's actually useful if you can't stride, or even in the early game if you hit the 10k, not 10k, the number of 10 cards in the drop zone. So those numbers sometimes help in that respect, and also in the late game. Like I said, if you can't stride, you could still be an effective Vanguard, and at the same time, he has an axe skill where you can counterblast, drop mill 4 of the cards on top of the deck to the drop zone, and actually call to +2 cards to the number of grade threes in the soul. How? Wow. However you word that. But point is, if you have no grade threes in the soul, +2 it, you get 2 calls basically. If you have 1, you get 3 calls, and so on. And so really, he's a massive field builder potentially, and can actually do your turn. Especially once you have GB live, you can use some of your GB restricted cards such as Cannoneer, Columbar, Nightstorm, and all those awesome and amazing cards. The other thing is that he's 12k, and so just really thinking about it, Cocytus is really a card that you can go first on your grade 3 turn and not be detrimental by it. There are other key cards that help with like Greed Shade and some of the other aspects with that you can just, what's the word? Sculpt your hand into a quality hand for actually surviving that first stride turn if they go into it before you do. And at the same time, you can have a heal trigger and G-Guard and then just go into your stride and actually just have a solid turn that way. And I felt Cocytus did a better job at that than Night Rose or any other grade 3 worth mentioning in the V series. So that's the way I looked at it. And at the same time, is that it's just a great card overall. Yeah, I guess enough talking about that guy. And so we're also running Nightstorm and then the 4 Skull Dragons. Skull Dragons are very big beater, especially once you get to enough cards in the drop zone. I mean, it becomes a threat even if you have 10 or even more. So just starting at that point, he's already annoying to the opponent, so they're gonna try to stop that. And so it makes it harder for them and all that stuff. So you can abuse it with the Columbar, Nightstorm, Ping Pong attack combo. Or you can use it for the Megiddo final, ultimate strike turn kind of thing. And so you would call 4 Skull Dragons, you got the Nightstorm, and then you recall another Skull Dragon and get another Skull Dragon attack, and then you still have your Megiddo strike to attack on top of that. Very powerful win con, very powerful just in general. And if you write them, you get a protect gift, so that's a plus. Worst case scenario, you do write it, right? And then, of course, Nightstorm, he's the one that basically GB1. If this unit is hollow at the end of the battle, you can call any unit besides him on a different rearguard circle. And that's really what we use him for, just to promote multi-attack. So typically, if you can get 4 to 5 attacks a turn, you're pretty much in a good boat. The Grand Blue with the Obadiah Stride has a massive power-up to the field, and it makes that 4 or 5 attack turn even more stronger at that sense. And you can be effective and also just maintain advantage and gain advantage with other cards like Cannoneer, Greed Shade, and just kind of go from there. And it's really what helps Grand Blue push, if that makes any sense. And so the other thing that I wanted to mention is that some of the metagame that comes to mind, and part of it was like the Ezo hit. Yes, Ezo got hit in the terms of Wonder Ezo. I mean, but if they still go off, they still go off. So you definitely want to study that matchup. You still want to know when to give them counterblast and when not to give them counterblast and that kind of stuff. And at the same time, you still have to face some of the other prevalent decks that could be DI, Neo Nectar, which just, especially Neo Nectar, is because they just have a better early game. And so if you have a card like, let's say, Night Rose, and you're forced to go grade 3, she doesn't do anything. And it's a real opportunity loss, and it can actually just cost you the game at that point. And so it made me feel even more lean to Cocytus per se in that respect as well. So... and then sometimes rogue decks too. I mean, just being Cocytus in 12k is just very solid overall. So he's good when you don't stride, and when you do stride is basically what I'm summing up. So let's go into the next lineup. On to the grade 2. So we're playing 12 grade 2s. We are playing 4 Greed Shade, 4 Ruin Shade, and one of these techs of each. So let's cover Greed Shade first. Basically, during your turn, when he's basically you have 10 cards or more in the drop zone, he just gets +5. So he becomes a little 14k beater, so which is good in the early game and also in the mid to late game, just to have that extra power. It wouldn't hurt. He would actually be able to hit Vanguards by himself, so he becomes 14k again, so he can hit 14k and up basically by himself. In the early game, it's nice because if you're going against like a Force Clan, and if you already did some excessive milling through him and Rune Shade and all that kind of stuff, you can actually hit the 10k base from those Vanguards that they're grade 2s, right? Essentially. So that helps. And then the next goes, the very important one is that Regards goes. When he's placed, discard a card, mill the top 2 from the deck, and you can actually pick one of the cards besides him from the drop zone and add it to your hand. And so this is a really powerful card. It fixes your hand, and essentially when you combine it with the Obadiah Strike, you can grab anything from your deck and put it into your drop zone, and thus put it into your hand. It's just a really solid card. So whatever combo pieces you may need to call from the hand, or maybe to just guard with like heal triggers, PGs, and all that kind of stuff, that's what he's there for, really. And he just brings a level of consistency if you play him at 4, so that way you can just see him in the early game, and he's actually useful in the early game too. With playing Night Rose in the past, when you're GB active locked, right, in the early game, you can't do much, and you really just play regular Vanguard without any skills. And just having skills like Greed Shade and even Ruin Shade is just super helpful in that respect, and I could just definitely appreciate that. So, especially if you have to stay the grade 2 game an extra turn or two and kind of go from there, and those cards help. So into Ruin Shade. Ruin Shade is another great card. So when it attacks Vanguard, you can mill the top 2 cards, gets +4 for that battle. And then the second skill is during your turn, if you have 10 or more in the drop zone, again, it gets +4. So it's a 13k attacker if it just has the power up. And then if you have the other 4k, it becomes a 17k, which is a decent number against 12k Vanguards. So we're talking about Protect, we're talking about Excel. And so just being the 17k poke forces a 10k shield. But in the early game is actually where he comes and shines, or she. I'm not sure if it's a guy or a girl, to be honest. But anyway, so when he's on Vanguard, that way you place him on Vanguard and have a Greed Shade in the rear guard, you just kind of go off and you start setting up your drop zone. And so then you have starting to have options, especially if you don't stride yet, and you have Cocytus, especially if you go grade 3 first. It starts helping you to actually have some options to kind of like do an effective grade 3 turn on top of that. And at the same time, it can help you prepare for the stride game, essentially. And basically, it comes to like you got the heals, you got the PGs, you got some combo pieces that you may need, you know, and that kind of thing. I do play the Hanalis, and so there might be chances where I might have to grab a Hanali and actually put it in my hand instead of from the drop zone. The reason is because Hanali has a skill where it forces you to counterblast, so if you can do certain plays, you can kind of like just play that as your last card and be like, haha, you know, kind of thing. So you can have a lot of options between these two together, and they just work really well, especially the milling aspect, so you can build your drop zone, so you can have options, and you Obadiah into cards that you only need left or are getting closer to having everything in the drop zone available to you. So yeah. Now for the spicy part, the text, right? So a good example, if you look at Solemn Vanguard's deck profiles and even the Jeremy deck profile, you start seeing a lot of similarities. Honestly, Grand Blue is in a spot where that build, general build, essentially is the key build that is really good in the competitive game, and there's some slight changes throughout players. For me, for example, I added the King Serpent. But before I cover him, let's just cover the bases. Columbard, he's GB1 on attack. When he's boosted, you can counterblast, call something on the other regard circle. So he helps you with multi-attacking. You can actually call a Night Storm, and then a Night Storm can call Skull Dragon, and so you can have the 4-5 attack combo. And go from there. He's just very helpful in extending your combo plays. If you have like the Romario, which is a 12k booster at that point, a 12 plus 9 actually makes a 21k column. So if you're facing like an 11k Vanguard, that makes magic numbers. Also, when you do the Obadiah turn, if you call him and a Grenache, they get +5 each. And so he becomes 14, Grenache becomes some 10k booster. So it makes a 24k line. And at that point, if they get a trigger, it still hits. So it's a decent number column as well. So you can play around with the numbers and kind of go from there as well. And then you got the Cannoneer, where basically on call from drop, counterblast 1, kill something, and if it's hollowed, then you can draw a card. So you can hollow it and actually get the draw, or you decide to not hollow it and not get the draw. Before that was relevant with Night Rose, but in this build, you always want to hollow it because you want to get the draw in that respect. And it's just very helpful because you want to get rid of pesky regards in either clan. It could be in Ezo, it can be in Neonectar DI, any other random stuff that just... Especially if they're in the back row, you could just eliminate those cards like that, pop, you know? And so it just helps with that. And at the same time, you draw a card. So that's amazing, basically. Then we have the Ghost Ship. Basically, Ghost Ship cannot be called from hand, or yeah, he cannot be called from hand. You can still ride him. So if you're stuck with him, you can ride him. But the other skill is really what he's for. Is basically when he attacks, he gets 15k until the end of the battle, and then you can draw a card and retire it. And so it gives you advantage and also gives you a form of a beat stick. Kind of reminds me of Coral Assault, where it gets the plus 15k, so it could actually be a beat stick. But with that, you can generate advantage too without relying to counterblast with the Cannoneer, because the Cannoneer does cause a counterblast, and sometimes it may put you in a position where you're like, I really don't want to spend the counterblast on just one card. I want to have a different option, and Ghost Ship is really that key. And at the same time, he's a beater, so you take a card, you could potentially take an extra card out of your opponent's hand, and you draw one. So it's like a win-win, basically. It's just the difference is really the counterblast and your attack pattern at that point. So now to the King Serpent. Now, this card has been really good to me for over the past few years. And I know there's a lot of players that don't like this card. I think the primary reason because it's 8k. So there's only one of him, so the chances of riding him are very low. And at the same time, you can sculpt your hand with Greed Chain in the early game, and you can mill it and all that kind of stuff, or guard it normally, or you can call it on if they're still on the grade 1 Vanguard, they're still 8k, so you can call it on your grade 2 turn and poke with the rear guard, and then call attack with your Vanguard, so you can still get the attack, and then if they start attacking it, you can intercept with it. So you can get really creative with, just going over the 8k base, but the skill is basically when it's called from drop, you can soul charge and counter charge. That is very key. Part of it is because it's on demand, essentially, and so if you do a massive field call, you basically refund that field call. And on top of that, you get cards in the soul. And slowly by surely, your soul is an extension of your drop zone at some point, especially when you got cards that soul blast, like your G guards and some of the grade 1s too. You can actually put those cards into the drop zone and actually use them for your turns. That can be vital. And so he kind of has that extra aspect of digging deeper into the deck by soul charging aspect. And you can do certain combo plays, and part of it is also if your opponent sort of like damage deny you, to a point where you could only do the field call, for example. And so it's like, well, I'm gonna leave him with one counterblast and let him pass my turn, right? You can actually just call the King Serpent behind the Vanguard and call the rest of the field that you want, especially like the Columbard or the Night Storm or whatever, and you'll countercharge it, and now you have that one counterblast again, so you can use for basically a 4 attack turn. And if your opponent wasn't really counting that, it catches them off guard, and they're like, ah, crap, And so at that point, they were probably better off giving the damage, or I don't know. But point is, you actually had the on-demand counter charge, and you can actually extend your turn if you need to. Sometimes you may need it to go from a 4 attack turn to a 5 attack turn. You could even do it in the Megiddo play, where essentially if you only have 3 Skull Dragons and you have the 1 Night Storm, but then you don't have anything else that's worth calling. Very low chance, but still, if you call King Serpent, you'll refund part of Megiddo's cost. And now you have the availability to call with Night Storm if you were literally only on 2 counterblasts and you only had 3 Skull Dragons and you only have the 1 Night Storm, or even if you had the 4 of them, you just have the 4th one in the drop. You can use this to countercharge and just give you the extra attack, essentially. And because of Megiddo, this gets +5. Because of Obadiah, this gets +5. And it becomes a 13k attacker. So you could attack with it even against Force Vanguards and then still do like a multi-attack turn pretty effectively. And you can save the booster for something else, like a Columbard or a Night Storm, depending on your pattern, or even just a booster for the Ghost Ship if you really need to draw instead of like calling the Skull Dragon. Because most of the time, Skull Dragon doesn't need a booster per se. So you can really go someplace in that respect. And at the same time, I do play the Hanali, and sometimes that may be relevant, where you use the Hanali to counterblast the rest of your counterblast. And then the King Serpent, you can proc it afterwards and then get the counter charge. And also do a 4 attack turn, because Hanali will let you do the 4 attacks with the rear guards, but not 5 attacks. So you can still find that balance, be effective, and set up for a Hanali play at the same time. On to the grade 1s. So we're playing 11 grade 1s. We are playing the 4 Romario, the 4 Dolph the Ghosty, and he's the unplaced draw card, discard PG. 2 on the Hanali, and then 1 of the Ripple Banshee. So with the Romario, basically, if you have 10 or more, he gets +4, so he's a 12k attacker. He could be a 12k booster, like I mentioned with Columbard, so you can make actual numbers. A good column number is that he's 12k, but behind a Night Storm, and since Night Storm is 11, 11 plus 12 is 23, and then if you have an Obadiah 5k or a 10k beef on that column, that becomes quickly, a 28 or a 33, which are all really good numbers, if you really think about it. And so in that respect, it helps a lot. The PGs, like I said, he's the one that he's on place, Vanguard, discard or draw a card. So with this, it helps you actually kind of dig deeper to your deck, set up for your drop zone, put cards that you don't need from your hand into the drop. Skull Dragons, Ghost Ships, and even a King Serpent, you'd rather have them in the drop rather than your hand. And so that helps with that too. He is a 7k base. Maybe you want to deny damage when you first ride. That's okay. So that's an option there too. And at the same time, you can call it with Negronor, the G-Guard, so you could actually perfect guard with your G-Guardian and be good for that. Especially when you got like perfect guard restrictions from the hand from other strides and all that kind of whatnot, right? And so this leads into first Ripple and then Huntley. With the Ripple Banshee, of course, when it's placed from the drop, you can Soul Blast one, draw a card, and it gets +4 for the turn. So it's a 12k booster, and you draw a card at the same time. It's really nice, actually. Before Grand Blue, we use Sea Strolling Banshee as basically the same thing. The only difference is that that card is weaker, and this card is a 12k booster on top of that, and of course it has the 10k shield value from the V series. So the shield value is very helpful in this case, and so even your grade 1s are great just to keep them in the hand and actually guard with them and just have a couple of them just boost to make some numbers. Like, you really only need like 2 Romarios or 1 of 1 each, and then a Grenache on top of that as your back row boosters. And so if you have the rest of them in your hand, it just helps with shield. Where your grade 2s are 5k shields, and you rather have them in the drop zone so you can actually call them and do stuff, right? So, and at the same time, like I said, she's Soul Blast, so any cards that you Soul Charge with King Serpent or your Road and all that kind of stuff, or Romario skill, where I forgot to mention his skill, his other skill. So when he's right upon it, you can Counter Blast 1, put a card from your hand into the Soul, and then mill 3 cards, and then add 1 card from the drop to the hand. And so if you purposely put a card into the Soul, she can Soul Blast it out for later, essentially. So that way you can still have access to that card. But on top of that, Romario also builds Soul in that respect too, so they can feed for Ripple Banshee and so on. Now onto the Hanali. I keep mentioning Hanali. It's honestly a really nice card, especially right now in this metagame. So what I've noticed, especially with Excel clans, if you let them build up to enough Excel circles, their field just starts to get massive. Every time they rewrite grade 3, if they're using Excel 2, they draw a card. So they have the resources to keep calling stuff. And if they're a clan like Gold Paladin, they can just call stuff for, for free, basically, almost. And it's just like, if I can restrict the number of attacks to help me survive even better, that'd be great. And so that's what Hanali is there for. And so for those of that don't know, is that all rearguards cannot attack the Vanguard for the 5th battle or more unless they counterblast. So this forces your opponent to counterblast each time they want to attack your Vanguard when it's 5th battle or more. And with that, it's just like, if they don't have the counterblast, they can't do it. And if they do, is it really worth it? It kind of puts them in the spot. And then one of the things that I've noticed is that you could honestly put both of them on the field, and your opponent would have to pay 2 counterblasts for a attack to go through. And at that point, your opponent may only have 1 counterblast, and it's just like, I can't even do it. And so if you can take advantage of that situation, then it puts your head in the game as well, because you're limiting your opponent on their attacks, especially if their deck thrives on the Muay Thai attack. Another example is Aqua Force, right? If you can restrict the number of attacks, that's great. And so they have to redo their turns, and it's just really awkward. Especially since I'm an Aqua Force player as well, it's just really awkward. Like, if I could only do 4 attacks and that's it, it's kind of annoying, right? You can take advantage of Lambros or Alexandros up to the maximum output that you wanted to. And so this card is actually really good and worth playing. And again, if you write it, it's a 6k, you can deny damage on that kind of stuff. But other than that, you can just call it. You can put it in your hand and call it when you need to. You may end up surprising your opponent if you have one in the drop and you have one in the hand. And you plop the second one, they're like, what the heck? That kind of thing. But honestly, it helps up in those matchups, especially in the Ezo matchup. And maybe even the Neo Nectar, depending on how they do their patterns with Gladiolus and all that kind of stuff, and Katrina. It just limits their attacks, and you set up pretty well. And I will mention a stride that kind of helps with that, but ideally you can do it with Obadiah, and Obadiah can actually call 4 to 5 cards to a certain point, and that way you can just call these, use skills like Hidden Ear or King Serpent in a certain order where you can get the maximum value. Because one of the restrictions about this is that when it's placed on rear guard, choose one of your face-up cards in your damage zone and turn it face down. So it forces you to counterblast when you call this. And so most of the time, once you call 1 or 2 of these, you have no counterblast to work with during your battle phase. And so that's why I actually saw more value in the King Serpent, to do the King Serpent after this to get the counter charge. Or maybe if you want to abuse other cards that counterblast anyway, like Cannoneer, when you call them, then use them. essentially. So you can get really creative. You gotta practice the deck with Unhollies is what I'm saying. And I'm just trying to throw things and examples at you guys that would actually help you with that. and so, and I'll bring it more back with some of the strides and go over that a little more. Onto the grade zeros. So we are playing 12 crit and 4 heal. One of the things that I love about Grand Blue is that you can be very aggressive with the 12 crit. So that's why we have grade 1 PGs in that respect instead of the draw PGs. The draw PGs aren't bad per se, but it's just that if we want to be more crit focused, especially in this meta game where we need to be aggressively and especially taking advantage of the Obadiah stride, you're milling cards that are non-triggers most of the time, and then that way your drive checks become even more deadly. There are times where you just rip double crit. I'll say that out front. And so you can literally win by putting an opponent from 3 to 6 just by the Vanguard attack. Or if they didn't have enough shield, you can stack it on a Skull Dragon and kind of go from there, really. And so just having this amount of crit is very helpful. Plus, it's a 15k shield, so if you grab it with Greed Shade, it's very helpful, or you could just guard with it and then just grab it with Greed Shade later and so on. Ideally, you want the heal triggers because you want a G-Guard with Necronora, with Necro Mode, and so on. And also set yourself up for an ideal Megiddo turn and also Obadiah turn. So you can get the more bang for your buck, basically. And then, of course, with our starter, we have Captain Nightkid. He's the on-ride draw 1. And then Grenache is an addition. He goes in the main deck. For when he's hollow and he dies at the end of the battle. Oh, not the end of the battle. Wow. At the end of the turn, when he dies to hollow, you can actually countercharge too. And in this deck is very vital because at the end of the turn, you really don't have any counterblasts or you barely have any. And so this card actually helps you refund that back. And so that way it puts you in a position of next turn to actually do stuff. Because most of the time you use one counterblast to call field, and then the extra counterblast you do with multi-attacking or a Cannoneer, right? And so that's really the general pattern that goes through, and Grenache just helps with keeping that consistent flow. And he's a booster still, so you can get the value from, like I said, Obadiah gives him a +5, so he becomes a 10k booster. And you can plop him down behind the Vanguard or make a rearguard column and actually just make numbers happen, essentially. And so I think he's still important enough to actually main deck him. To take him out is risky because honestly, if you want to overextend a turn without feeling the worry that you might not win that turn, but still have this guy to countercharge, then you're in a very good spot. And then next turn you can just actually finish the job. And sometimes that happens. And so that's why he's very important and is still valuable to be in the main deck. Onto the G-Guards. So we're playing 2 Negro Mode, 2 Negronora, 1 Rectum. So Negronora is the biggest shield that we got, essentially. She is the GB1 guard flip, basically. And so when you call her to Guardian Circle, you can actually Soul Blast 1, flip a card in the G-Zone, and actually call 2 cards with different grades from the drop and put them into the Guardian Circle. So this is where you could actually grab a PG and PG. You could actually just grab a heal trigger in a grade 1 that's a 10k base. So you got 20 and a 10k together, that's 30. 30 plus 15, that makes 45k shield on top of what your Vanguard base is at the moment. So very big shield, very valuable, and it gets closer to GB8, or it might be the difference between having GB3 online and just being able to go to Megiddo, basically. We also have Negro Mode, and so Negro Mode is sort of like Negronora. So you Soul Blast it when it's called to Guardian Circle. It gets +5 for every 5 cards up to the 15, basically. So if you got 5 cards, +5. If you got 10, you get 2 5s. And if you got 15, you get 3 5s. So 15k plus 15, 30k shield, maximum value. And this card, for most of its life, never saw play, to be honest. The Soul was very valuable because of Gauche. He's the stride, and I actually don't play Gauche. And so that's part of the reason why I'm able to play like these mini G-Guards that Soul Blast. And at that point, you can utilize this guy, especially if you don't have GB active, so you can't use Negronora. You can still use Negro Mode because most of the time your deck, I should say your drop zone, has enough count to make this actually worth it now. And you really, I played Negro Lily before, and he's the Counterblast G Guardian. And honestly, you don't want to use his Counterblast. You rather use the Soul at that point with Guardian. And so Negro Mode actually, I guess, quote unquote, I would say made a comeback, but he never really did something at first. So now he's valuable. And I definitely recommend playing him. And then Rectum is there to help with the filter. And so sometimes you need to get rid of cards. And sometimes you may just want a G-Guard and not necessarily use the skills of Negro Mode or Negronora because they're not needed, depending on the attack. And if it's a weak attack, plus you rather just G-Guard for the sake of G-Guard and to get closer to Megiddo, a higher count for Obadiah, and of course the GB8 as well. So they all have a role and they have a purpose. And so I played the 2, 2, and the 1, and it's been working out for me. On to the strides. So I'm going to talk about these guys at the end. Let's just cover the basics first. So I kept mentioning Obadiah. Obadiah is a phenomenal stride from Premium Collection. So just reiterate his skill, Counterblast 1, turn any card face up in the G zone, usually Sea Breeze. And at that point, you can search your deck for up to 5 cards and put them in the drop zone. So you can choose 0 if you need to, because if you get close to deck out, you will deck out, right? But ideally, that first strike turn, you want to mill 5 cards so you can get all those combo pieces that you need. Your Night Storms, your Cannoneers, your King Serpents, your Grenache, your Skull Dragons, your Rough Seas Banshee, or not Rough Seas, Ripple Banshee, and the last sword. And at the same time, when you call those units, you can call 2 units for every card face up in your G zone. So if it's the very first strike, you can call 2. If you G guard it and follow up with Obadiah, you can call 4. And then after that, you call full board, essentially. And each of those units get plus 5k on top of that. So this stride does a lot. And it makes your turn, to be honest. So it's very hard to do a first stride with other cards. And as you can see, I'm not playing Gauche. And that's part of the reason why I don't play the Rough Seas Banshee, the crit that can go into Soul and give you a card. It helped with building Soul, and at the same time, you can abuse it with Gauche to Soul Blast and call that many, and then put them back into the Soul and draw cards. And it's a really good strike turn, but Obadiah most of the time is even better now, which is kind of ridiculous if you really think about it. And that's why one of the things I like about the trigger lineup, they're all V-Series triggers. So they all have the 15k shield for the crits, and the heals are 20k, so you just get the value from being defensive, and at the same time, you get the power from the 10k power up from those triggers. And so it makes your turns very deadly in that respect. So your plays aren't halted by a trigger or something, because you're getting those 10k power-ups if you drive check those triggers. And again, Obadiah mills the cards that you want, so that leaves more for drive checking triggers on top of that. So I played the 2. The third one doesn't seem as necessary. Plus, I wanted to make room for certain situations, and that's why there's some cards that are not normally here. So with Twilight Night Rose, she is still good. So part of the reason she's here is for the new Atama matchup. If you are fighting against them and they have a decent sized hand, especially if they have a protect marker, they can do the bird, the Koku Shigurishiri. Gosh, man, new Atama in the names. The crow, basically. And you really it hurts your hand, and on top of the Jamio Kongo and all that kind of stuff. And so if you can like wipe your board, then their Hanzo or their Crow become useless at that point. And so if you can do that for even at least one turn, it puts you ahead of the game, because it basically calls a field for, I guess I'll say her skill. Counterblast 1, flip a copy of itself, and then for every card that's face up on your G zone plus 1, call that many units. And if you call 3 or more, you get a crit. And then at the end of the turn, they die because they are hollowed. Even if they're not a hollow unit, they are hollowed. So it clears the board because they're going to die due to a hollow given skill from her. And she has a crit, so sometimes maybe that crit could be the play. But I feel most of the time I still lean to Obadiah anyway. Especially if you mill again, you're going to hit a crit on top of that, more than likely. But sometimes you may have to attack with the Vanguard and have that crit pressure too. So it's there for that option too, but it's mainly there for the new Atama matchup. I did consider playing a second pair if that matchup goes long, but I really wanted to make room for other stuff. And so with Sea over here, if you're playing the Grade 2 game, you're high damage, you do the Cocytus play, then you stride into Sea, and you can do a multi-attack turn, maybe 4 attacks. It's kind of like a mini Obadiah turn, just like Solom has said in his video before. That was very insightful, actually, and I even told him that, so shout out to him again for that. So it is there for that option, so if you feel like you have to Sea somebody, you can. But it may not always come up at that point. The GB8, I'll go with the GB8. The GB8 is free, so when it's placed, call up to 5 cards to get 10k, and they retire at the end of the fact. They kind of are basically hollowed, but not really hollow. And I don't know, the wording's weird. But anyway, it's a free call, and they all get 10k, and it's a very powerful turn if you play it right, multi-attack. It's like Obadiah for free, essentially. So, yeah, it's very vital. So I still play the 1. And plus, if you don't finish him on that turn, you still have your other strides to fall back onto. But normally you actually do finish the turn, but there are those small cases where you don't, but you wanted to do it because it was free. So there's a difference. You know, a King Serpent becomes 8k to 18k at that point, and so it can still actually hit some shield, and you can extend attacks and kind of go nuts from there. And so going into the Nation Dragons, we have the Ballerina and then the Megiddo. The Ballerina is honestly there if... Wow, I hit the thing. It's honestly there for if you get damaged tonight early on and you don't have any counterblast, you can stride into this with the same copy, and it just gives you something to do if you have the skill live. And sometimes you may just kill your opponent if they're like high damage and they're like breaking their shields and they're not even expecting this stride. At the same time, it just kind of helps to stride something useful rather than just a race and just kind of have a vanilla stride turn, if that makes sense. And then, so really, that's what it's there for. Nothing much, but just having that just to have like a counterblast free stride that does something, basically. Then we have the Megiddo, which is, like I said, the Megiddo turn is very powerful still. With the Skull Dragons, the Night Storms, you can use other beaters like the Ghost Shiv, the Ruin Shades, and all that kind of stuff, depending on the deck size, all that kind of stuff. Or just abuse with the Column Bar. Just you could go nuts with this turn. And so it's still there. Sometimes it is the answer to put the nail in the coffin. And you go into it if you can. And it's very easy to go into the stride thanks to Greed Shade. I know I did a Night Rose video. I call it Night Rose Greed. And basically that deck was focused to second strike Megiddo, getting the ultimate strike piece, the heal trigger, all this stuff with the abuse of Greed Shade. But this deck also has a good chance of going into Megiddo, so it's still valuable. And so this could be your second strike still, and you win the game at that point too. So now that the basics are out of the way, let's get into Nagarsanger and Dragoot. Alright, so Nagarsanger is the easiest to explain. So Nagarsanger has come in play before where you have the Link Joker matchup. And so if you ran into a Chaos player, especially if you're in Team League, you just don't know what you run into sometimes. And so just having this stride being able to utilize the same circle for another attack, it could be the difference between winning and losing. And it's happened to me before, and I've practiced those Link Joker matchups before, and it's one of those strides that actually help with that matchup. At the same time, Grand Blue doesn't have a G-Guard like Aqua Force or some other clan that can just unlock a circle. And since we are Protect, we just don't have an Excel circle that we could just create on demand like Aqua Force again, and other clans as well, like Novas and stuff like that. So that's what Nagarsanger is there for. And Nagarsanger is basically Counterblast, discard one, flip a copy of itself. At the end of the battle, do that skill, and then you call something from the drop. It gets plus 5k for every face-up card in the G-Zone, so you can build up to a decent size, and that card you call will be a beater. And depending on what you do, it's really cool at the same time. And then you can get really creative. If you have like a lot of counterblasts, you can, if you had another card that can superior call as a rearguard, you can continue kind of looping the ping pong attack, and so you can get you can push more than just 5 attacks. But with the Night Storm and the Column Bar being the only extenders, I feel like you need a third card to actually extend even further with the Nagarsanger play. You can kind of go back to my Star Loop videos, and you can see that there's some cards you could just keep extending thanks to Nagarsanger at that point. But you're going to use a lot of counterblast, so just be wary of that. So now, Dragoot. So it's like, why are you playing this card? Dragoot is very situational, and he's in the purposes where you can utilize him with Hanali. And he also massive whiteboard. And so, for example, on an Obadiah turn, at the end of the turn, your field will look like this, actually. So you call the Hanalis, you use all your counterblasts, you soul charge and countercharge with the King Serpent, and then you extend it to 4 attacks using the Column Bar into the Skull Dragon. So this dies at the end of its battle, and then of course, when you unstride, this dies and you'll countercharge too, right? So right now in this board state, right now you're at low damage, and so if you're facing off, let's say, Ezo, and they're also at low damage, or they heal back to a low damage, and so eventually you can take some damage. So let's just say you take a third damage at this point. When it comes to your turn, assuming that you still have a Column Bar, you can just stand and then go into Dragoot. And so when you go into Dragoot, he calls the same number of cards that are already on the field. So right now you have 3. If you don't have the third rearguard, you can call a card from hand. It's just going to be another card that you have to commit. And so then you'll counterblast 2 with Dragoot to call full field of 3 units. So with that, you want to bring 3 units that, honestly, these are the only hollow units that you have in the deck in general. And so the reason that hollow is important is because you're able to retire the same number of cards on your opponent's side due to the number of hollow units that you call. And so, for example, you would just call over these guys, kind of go from there. If you need to use the extra counterblast to do a board wipe in the sense of a 4th rearguard, then you can use the counterblast to kill that 4th rearguard. And so for this part, Dragoot will kill 3. And so that could be very important in key aspects, especially if your opponent's hand isn't really combo piece oriented, and it might be just be a handful of triggers, or it might just be a low size hand depending on the place. And this can be used with a variety of Excel clans. And so you want to kind of like judge where you're at, where they're at, to see if this is actually worth doing. Because most of the time you're gonna do Obadiah. Not gonna lie with that. But Dragoon is there just to have that extra retire power if it actually becomes essential. I know in the past that I've used this card, especially against Sanctuary Guard Dragon, where if they don't have the ability to build a field again, that their turns are just lackluster. And so you have a similar aspect you can do with other clans. And sometimes it might be just helpful retiring some key pieces that they already have in the field, because some clans just can't get that back, right? Grand Blue has the ability to bring back units from the drop zone, not really other clans. So that's very fruitful. And again, if you need to kill a 4 Fury Guard, then Cannoneer is the way to go. So you'll Counterblast, and you can draw a card on top of that. Dragoon with this card, and so if you don't board wipe with, if they only have 3 Weird Guards, that would be considered a board wipe. You don't get the draw back from Dragoon. But then you can use the Cannoneer to do an extra Counterblast and actually draw back. Now, in this circumstance, you wouldn't be able to multi-attack because you only have 3 Counterblasts and you just used it with Cannoneer. So if you went down to, let's say, 4, then you would be able to do a 4-attack turn while keeping the Hanalies in play. And that's very key. And so this is not really meant to be a finishing stride. This is more for a mid-game stride that will set you up for the finishing turn next turn. In fact, this can put your opponent in a position where they can't really just kill you next turn, and it might be the extra turn that you need for a follow-up Megiddo turn, per se. So this is the key aspect that I wanted to point out with Dragoon. Especially, it pans out really well once the Hanalies are set up already. So that way you can just focus on calling the hollow units. And what's nice is that you're already going to grab these hollow units with Obadiah. Like, they're the key pieces anyway to the deck. And just having these 3 hollow pieces, you're able to retire. If you want to add more hollow units, you can. But honestly, I don't think it's worth it. And so keeping it like this seems just fine. 1 card in the G-Zone seems fine just me. And like I said, you can replace some cards to put in the extra Twilight Roses, a 3rd Obadiah, or you can play other cards. It really just depends on your meta again and how you feel which strides can be useful in the situations and that sort of stuff. So that's really what I wanted to point out with Dragoon. Again, retire power, mid-game stride. If your opponent's at low damage or they have not a great hand for rearguard replenishment, then this is probably a go-to stride and would honestly catch them off guard too. So yeah. And now to wrap up the deck profile, guys, this is honestly one of my favorite decks to play just in general with the clan Grand Blue. I really like how the deck turned out, and honestly, I felt very confident going into Team League. I felt like that I can pretty much withhold myself with any matchup and actually have a concise plan of action, so that way I can guarantee my victories in that winning procedure, you can say. But I really like this deck profile, how it turned out. As you can tell, it's a little more detailed than before some of my other recent deck profiles, but when it comes to tournaments, it comes with preparation, and practice. And solidifying and optimizing your deck profile so that way you can actually feel confident enough to actually go to a big tournament and actually get a good chance of whatever your goal may be. It may be topping 8, it might be actually get to top 1, top 2, whatever it may be. And so I'm very happy how this deck profile turned out. I really like some of the new interactions that I learned, especially with the V series, tying it all together with GB locked units and all that kind of stuff. So it's very fun. And honestly, I will continue to do deck profiles for Grand Blue. And so keep on the lookout for that. So if you liked the video, give it a like, comment down below, share with a friend, and subscribe. See ya, amigos. Later.